Hello, my beautiful people. It's episode 99. And before we get started, we do our normal little sponsor spots because we need to pay the bills. That's very important. First, and always first, betdna.com for all of your testing needs. Use code SHITHAPPENS for $5 off the crypto panel. betdna.com. Some people need to go back and watch the crypto video because there was a big long thing on Facebook about how Serpentis can't get into lizards and Varanus can't get into snakes. And that is incorrect. We have peer-reviewed literature that refutes that. So vetdna.com for all of your testing needs. Thank you. My God. Now, very quickly, as always, not in order, because I don't do things in order, sponsor time. Small Town Xotics has breeder male and female ball pythons available. Look at this one. This is the one I want, but I can't have it because I'm poor. Or this one. Also can't have it because I'm poor. The GHI yellow belly red striped fire clown. And it looks juicy and delicious. Check them out. Small Town Exotics Husbandry Pro Store. If you just Google Small Town Exotics Husbandry, it actually works with the Google algorithm now, so you can actually find them much faster. We love it. 10 out of 10. Thank you, Shane. Powerhouse Pythons Husbandry Pro Store. My husband just showed up and then left. Also, some breeder size animals and some little babies. A big old butter. I think this is the one I sold them. Juicy, huge eggs, pillowy, delicious. Check them out. Andrew, Pacific Northwest, Action. Bravo Zulu. I'm on their website too. We're actually doing a visual aid this time. Some proven breeders, some babies, het puzzle stuff, all looking great. You need to check them out on their website and send them a message. You can't buy here because we want to talk to you before we buy. Thank you, Eileen. You're the best. Bravo Zulu ball pythons. Stoneage ball pythons. I finally got to talk to him about how the show was, and he said it was actually really good. So the Albany show was great, and he will be on probably with Eileen and some other people like a round table post Tinley because he is going to Tinley. So that should be really fun. And we love talking about shows because something we all are sort of invested in financially. Next up, Chris at BNS Reptilia. His morph market is looking slim. I know he has 1,400 bulls and pine snakes. You know he does, and I know he does, and he does. So to save him the effort of taking pictures of all those wiggly worms, you need to message him and buy some right away. This is my request to you and his request to you. Thank you, Chris. Best of luck photographing them. I'm on number 120 photographing corn snakes or something. It's not fun. And I know taking pictures of them in a deli is not that aesthetic, but have you ever tried to trace down a shoelace that doesn't want to be corralled? I have. And this is the only way. This is how it's got to go. Gray Family Snakes showing off their pickups from Daytona. A pastel DG66 double het VPI pied from Kittinger Reptiles and a Hurricane to start the Hurricane Lori action from Busy Balls. Very nice, and congratulations. I think this is my favorite. I'm going to be honest. I'm very busy. I love busy ball pythons. And then we've been blasting it on Instagram, and I'll blast it a little bit here, but we'll blast it more later. Sal's charity auction is not this Saturday, but next Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern. We are still taking donations, and some of the donations are huge, giant, mega, very impressive, and Shane and I are very thankful for crazy lots. And we've posted some of them. There are more coming, and they are going to blow your socks off. How generous people are being, and I hope if you don't have anything to donate, you are there to bid. And if you don't have any money to bid, you're there to support and you share. Yes, please. Thank you. All right. On to the show. We did it. Thank you, everybody in chat. Here's Tony. He's muted. You want to unmute yourself?
There you go. Back. That was a great introduction now that I have a voice. My apologies. We'll get there.
We got this.
We got it.
Tony, hey. It's been a long time coming, and I wore my shirt.
That's awesome. I thought you might, so I didn't wear mine. I didn't want us to be too overbearing, but
yeah,
thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Let's chat. If you want to chime in anytime with I don't know why I'm holding a pair of scissors. I should probably set that down. That's pretty weird. If you want to chime in, chat with questions, we do have a list of what we're going to cover, but I was trying to trick him into a live because I thought, sometimes chat wants to know things we don't know that they want to know. And we want to sort of support that here. So I'll keep an eye on the chat and we'll let Tony introduce himself to us, Yankees. We don't know our ass from our hand at this point, but let us know who you are, please.
So my name's Tony Wigley, and I'm a founder of an organisation called Responsible Reptile Keeping. We're an international organisation, and our aim is to represent and advocate for responsible reptile keepers and the reptile community. That's it in a nutshell, but there's so much more we could talk about, of course.
Mm-hmm. And what is your experience in the hobby?
Okay, so I've essentially been a professional sidekick for about 35 years, which doesn't sound that glamorous, but actually it's pretty cool. So I've been working in the reptile trade and the hobby since I was about 15. Can you hear me well?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I started work when I was 15, working for what was at the time Europe's biggest reptile collection, biggest reptile store. It was called the Serpentarium, based in the Midlands in England. And when I was there, I got to meet anybody who was everybody in the reptile hobby, both in Europe, the UK, and a good few Americans as well. From there, I've worked in retail stores, wholesale businesses, live food breeders, venomous collections, handful of zoos and things like that. But for the last maybe 20 years, I've worked as a journalist, writing for most of the reptile trade press and pet trade press and reptile magazines here in the UK, Europe, and a few of the American magazines. And because of that, I've worked closely with many of the advocacy organisations here in the UK. So we have an organisation called Reptile, the Reptile and Exotic Pet Trade Association, and we've worked closely with them for about 15 or more years. And what we essentially did was we bolted our journalism and communications expertise onto the side of Reptile to help them to communicate and spread the word, spread their work. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's kind of the background behind us setting up responsible reptile keeping, because obviously being a journalist, it's been my job to keep an eye on what the animal rights groups have been doing. And that was really the launch pad for us to launch responsible reptile keeping. We're essentially a media branch, a media department for the international reptile community.
Mm-hmm. I guess we might talk about this later, but I kind of want to talk about it now, so I'm just going to do it because I living free right now.
That's freestyle.
A lot of people put like an imperative onto USARC in the US to be both the anti-legislation sort of arm of the hobby and to be more than that, which is like anti, animal abuse, pro good husbandry, which obviously they have like a husbandry standard on their website, but they want them to be everything too. So I don't know if you want to comment on that. Like, you're fulfilling the role of the PR for the hobby in a way that people want USARC to. So I was like, well, if USARC's mission is supposed to be narrowly about the laws, other organizations could take the other roles. We don't have to like force USARC's funding to stretch to something else.
And therein lies the conundrum, really. So just to give you a bit of context around your question, because the conversation about USARC is very much the same conversation we've had with the advocacy organisations here in Europe as well. And so let's give you an example. So let's imagine some crazy animal rights story comes out on the internet, and the one we usually use as an example is that animal rights campaigners claim that 75% of pet reptiles die in their first year. Now, as keepers, we instinctively know that that's crap. Yeah, just by instinct we know this. But even more importantly, there are two really good independent studies that tell a very different story. It's more like 3%. But anyway, every time a story like this hits the internet or hits the news, everybody says, well, somebody should do something. And I agree. Somebody should do something about it, because the animal rights groups spreading their propaganda and letting their lies permeate the internet makes us look bad unnecessarily. So we started to think about somebody should do something. So who should that somebody be? Well, the people who earn lots of money from the reptile trade are the big reptile brands, the big reptile businesses. Maybe they should do it because they have the most to lose. Well, the problem with that is that the people running those reptile businesses are busy running their businesses. And the amount of time they have to spend on the internet battering out a response when they see this kind of stuff is limited. And besides, which one of those businesses should take up the task and the expense and the workload of addressing those propaganda stories? Which one are we going to choose? Well, it would be unfair if only one had to do that. So next we look at who else could be addressing that misinformation, and we start to look at the USARCs and the Reptors and the other advocacy organisations. And as I say, we've worked closely with these organisations for a while, and what they are is essentially firefighting units. So adverse legislation is proposed, or we get a sniff of some really dubious legislation or policy, and these guys put their pants on the outside, put their cape on, and they go and save the day. And they're very, very good at doing that. And they've got a really good track record of doing that. And that role is absolutely vital. We'd be in a lot of trouble without them. So why don't they also address the misinformation? Well, the answer's simple, is that they, are busy fighting legislation at the sharp end, doing what they're very good at. And if our experience is anything to go by, their ability and their knowledge and expertise in communications is limited quite often. And that's quite understandable. They're not media specialists. They're not media experts. And that's why they don't do that. So the other people who could maybe do something about this misinformation online and in the mainstream media is keepers. And maybe keepers should be stepping up and addressing these issues when they see them online. And we believe that most of the keepers we know are passionate and they're eager and they're very willing to do some of that work and to fight that misinformation when they see it online. The thing that they lack are the resources. They don't have time to make good-looking videos, hour-long podcasts, documentaries, magazines, infographics and all the stuff that we're doing as media specialists. So what our goal is to equip the keepers with the information, the resources they need, so that every time they see some crap online, they can go, hang on a minute, that's not true, here's some information. And what that aims to do is to stop people believing the animal rights propaganda and giving us a voice so that we can tell our side of the story instead. So that's essentially what we do.
Right. And the average keeper is not media trained in any respect whatsoever. So even if like they did have time, the things that we produce are very like internal to our hobby. They do a very poor job of translating to, people who are external to the hobby for sure. I mean, I make a podcast that I fully admit it's not intended for like a general audience. So like nobody, it's always going to be limited to like the sort of the myopic, oh yeah, all snakes are awesome view. I already
Yeah.
assumed that.
Yeah.
I assume that you all are here because you also agree. So we're not, we
Preaching to the
100%
converted.
need a PR arm to like clear things up. What are your thoughts on like how to confront when like the AR stuff gets into peer-reviewed literature? Like, you know, that paper from 2020 that was like, yeah, we watched a bunch of YouTube videos and looked to see how big the, you know, the tubs were relative to the snake. And you're like, dang, this got, I don't know how peer-reviewed it was, but it got in the literature. It's there technically. Like, do we need to, I don't know, you know, like fund a PhD candidate, or I
Well,
don't know.
partly one of the problems that we have with peer-reviewed science and also with academia is that it's a very small niche of people that engage with that kind of media. That there are very few people who will read a report or a paper, and so its ability to permeate into the mainstream or into the non-specialist sector is limited. What we try to do when we produce content is we try to layer it so there will be some really good research behind what we do if you want to read it, or you could watch a 2-hour podcast, or you could watch an hour-long documentary, or you could watch a 10-minute animated video, or you could watch a 2-minute stream, or you could read a magazine article, or you could look at an infographic. So we're developing content that will appeal to a wide range of people. Some people don't want to watch a podcast. Some people want to read an old school magazine.
Right.
So we deliver the type of content that they want to engage with on the platforms that they're already populating. But yeah, that in terms of addressing the so-called science that comes out of the animal rights campaigners, that's problematic because often the science isn't very scientific at all. And our job really is to cherry pick, is to look at that science and say, hey, have you seen this? Well, this is why that's not correct. This is why that's ridiculous. If we
I mean, like, I guess have you, like, we could solicit, you know, someone who's hobby adjacent but in academia to write letters to the editor that are, you know, well sourced. They're like, you did accept this and there it is and it's in this journal, but it's stupid, basically, in nicer words than that. But that's sort of like the science sass that I'm into. I love that. That's my favorite. But you could science sass back in their own language and see if you can get papers pulled or whatever. If it's really like, you know, who is actually like replicating these like weird studies that are biased from the get-go? Nobody. They're just doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And they reference themselves. There's a lot of papers, written by the same guy that references himself all the way through, and then he's got these usual suspects of friends that peer review with him, and they pass each other's papers around and approve each other's papers, and then unwitting magazines and journals will publish, and quite often they're not peer reviewed journals, but they accept papers like that. I think there is some merit in devaluing those, but I think there's more merit in explaining to the people who may be adversely influenced through that misinformation. The people who don't know any better, the legislators, civil servants, the general public. There's more power and influence in those people with short, snappy, well-produced content.
I agree. I just I don't know. I do believe
I like to slap back.
I want the peer-reviewed literature to mean something. I know it's those days are gone, almost to the nth degree, but
it used to happen. I think there's a lot of academia out there now that doesn't have the credentials and kudos that it used to, especially in the welfare sector, unfortunately. I mean, let's use an example. Let's take that 75% of pet reptiles die in their first year. So that was produced and put out into a magazine, a journal called The Biologist. And the guy who produced it said it was a peer-reviewed journal. Well, it wasn't. It's not a peer-reviewed journal. And the way he came to his 75% study was he misrepresented the number of animals that were alive and well in the UK. Instead of using the best surveys and the best data, he used data that was recognised to be not the best methodology. Mm-hmm. So we have an organisation here called the Pet Food Manufacturers Association, and they do a telephone survey every year. Say, hi, do you keep any pets? What do you keep? And people say cats, dogs, fish, reptiles, whatever. And from that telephone survey, they reckon that the average pet population in any given household is 1.6. Now that's correct, usually around about if you keep dogs or cats, because if you keep a dog or a cat, you probably keep one. Some people keep two. Very few people keep more than two. So 1.6 is about right. But as we well know, if you keep reptiles, the odds on you keeping one or two is unlikely. Most people have vastly more reptiles. Mm-hmm. So the first thing this guy did is he said, we use this research that says 1.6 animals per household. And we all know it's not very, very good methodology for reptiles, but he chose that specific study when there were better studies out there. So that was the first thing he did wrong, and wittingly so, seemingly.
Yeah, and then then he like corroborated against like the import numbers, or like
you got it, yeah.
Okay.
So he counted the animals coming into the UK, into Heathrow, but instead of counting, so he counted all of the animals that came in, but he didn't discount the ones that flew straight out again to Europe or America or China or wherever. So again, a misrepresentation of the figures, and that arrived at 75%, and that 75% figure for reptile mortality in the first year is now widespread on the internet, used in many mainstream media, and was even quoted at the European Parliament meeting that I was at about a month and a half ago, and unchallenged as well.
Great.
So there you go. So what we did is we made a 10-minute video to refute that statistic in no uncertain terms, and now we're hoping that every time that statistic gets shared, that our video will be shared alongside it, so that people aren't misinformed. People have the information to work with.
So what Tony's saying, everybody at home, in case you're wondering, is like, if you see it, your job is also to like share their response in like social media. Obviously you're not going to the Parliament of UK and sharing at that point, but it's sort of like the grassroots version of misinformation fighting, correct?
And this is absolutely it. I think one of the reasons why we're facing so many more challenges from the animal rights campaigners isn't because we deserve it. And my reasoning behind that is obviously reptile husbandry, reptile keeping and reptile welfare has improved massively over the last 10 or 20 years, massively by magnitudes. So if we're getting better at keeping reptiles, why are we getting more hassle from the animal rights groups? Why are we getting more problems and more legislation originated from the animal rights groups? Well, I think I know the answer to that. And the answer I feel is because of the internet. Yeah. Since the internet's inception, people have started to source all of their ideologies, their opinions, their information, their news, their science from the internet and from social media specifically. And there's no denying that animal rights groups are very, very good at social media. And there's also no denying that if you look at social media for the reptile community, some of it's not doing us any favours, and none of it is really addressing the misinformation that's coming from animal rights groups. So we decided that we're confident that the reason the animal rights campaigns are being more successful and the reason they're more powerful is because the animal rights campaigners have control of the narrative and we don't. And our plan is that we can take control of the narrative. If we make the bullets, we hope that the keepers who see this propaganda and misinformation from animal rights groups online will use the information and the resources that we produce to put it to bed.
Emma asks, not to change it too much, is there going to be a US chapter. You want to like talk about like the structure of ROK, sort of?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we realized very early on in our planning was that most of the problems that we face are international problems. The positive list and invasive species and zoonoses and human health and human danger issues, these are the same old sticks that they beat us with, whether we're in Germany, Britain, America, wherever. So the content that we produce is internationally relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first thing we realized. It would be a shame to only produce stuff that was used in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first thing. But more importantly, we felt that the responsibility for protecting the trade and the hobby and the community should be borne by everybody with an interest in the hobby, the trade and the community, and proportionally so. So in our planning, we decided that bigger companies should provide more funding for the work that we do, and smaller companies should provide less funding, and keepers and stores should provide just a little. And what that does is it diversifies the cost to spread it as widely as possible, so that it's not too expensive for any given country, company, or sector of the community. But certainly the idea is that we work alongside Reptile and USARK and PAN, as they are now, to produce media that supports the campaigns that they undertake and the challenges that they face. So that's really what we aim to do: work alongside USARK and Reptile and PAN to produce media to support their work that they're doing already.
All right, can we look at your website for a second?
Yeah, do.
Okay. So it's already here, I guess, is the short answer to that, Reptilorian Emma. So like we already have stores in the US that are like store level sponsors.
Well, the two pins that you have there are both enclosure manufacturers. So
Okay.
we have Custom Reptile Habitats and Zen Habitats.
Right, but you could, if you were in the US, I think there's like perks for buying from them if you're a member. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of our stores in the UK and USA to come, and also from Custom Reptile Habitats, you get a discount if you're an RRK member.
Perks. We love perks.
You got it.
Is there anybody in Asia? No. Could be though, because they have problems too.
Oh, they do. So obviously we're based in the UK and our network's in the UK, which is why there's a great big conglomeration of pins in the UK map. So we've got a good many stores here and a good many members here, but we've got members from all over America as well, and all over parts of Europe as well.
Mm-hmm.
So our next step is to probably come to Tinley in, is it October?
Mm-hmm.
And follow up on some of the contacts that we've made, and look at getting sponsorship from businesses and brands in the USA, and also to recruit some stores. We just want to replicate the success that we've had in the UK in the USA. That's our next focus. But at the same time, we're also over in Europe at the Ham show next month. So yeah, it's expanding quite quickly.
Are you getting a table at Ham?
No, we're not. We're meeting with some of the big suppliers over there and some of the big advocacy organisations, and looking at working jointly with them to produce media for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Tinley would be a great place to do it. I think a lot of people just don't know about you guys yet, because like everyone's always asking USARK Florida and USARK to do this exactly. So, and they've been like, I don't really want to. And so,
well, we've only been launched for a year.
Mm-hmm.
We've only been strictly launched to the public for less than 8 months. So the progress that we've made already in the UK has really been quite encouraging and surprising. It's taken on a life of its own, and we know now that we need to replicate that in the USA. That's our next step, and with us only being 8 months old, it would have been difficult for us to make that step any earlier, I think.
Emma asks, how do we join? Do we want
Just
to
on the
join?
website. Yep.
Oh.
Join us. And then you scroll down and you decide if you're a keeper or a store or an educational experience. And if you're a keeper, you click keeper. And then it'll offer you a selection of options. You might be a supporter for, is it $5 a month?
Uh-huh.
And if you want to be a hero, that's $11 a month. And if you want to be an absolute legend, you can do an annual membership, which is $122 a month. And dependent on the membership you choose, we'll send you a mug and or a t-shirt and a magazine. But, and I'd like to stress this quite a lot, is that we don't want people to join us for a mug or a t-shirt. We don't want that. We like to send out the mugs and the t-shirts because we like to say thank you. But the reason we want people to support us is because they want to support the work that we do. And that's the primary reason we want people to support us. And also what it does is it adds people to our list of supporters, to our list as members, so that when we go to European Parliament or the American legal system or the British legal system, we can say, look, we've got 5,000 members, 10,000 members, 50,000 members, and that adds power to our voice. And also, the more people who support us, the more people are sharing our content and helping us to address the misinformation. I use my mother-in-law as a good test bed for our content. So she might understand a certain topic about snakes or lizards or crocodiles or whatever, and then we show her our content and she's like, I did not realize that. I wouldn't have thought that to be true.
Right.
And if we can change my mother-in-law's mind, then we know we're doing a good job of changing the general public's mind. And the way we do that is for members to share our content on their feed, so that people who are not absolute snake nerds like us, absolute reptile nerds like us, will see it to go, oh, that's interesting. I did not realize that.
Yeah, it's so important to realize, like, I don't know, like almost everything we do is insular because we just can't help being weird. We just can't help it. So anything to be like,
true.
Normal people talking to normal people, they will get it. Every time I go to a cookout or something, I shouldn't be there. I should not be there. They're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I just can't keep it inside. So if somebody can do that, you need more money. I'll give you more money. I don't care.
That's what we need.
Yeah, I know.
It's this is it. We're in our first 8 months of launch to the general public, and our membership is growing really fast. And surprisingly, our t-shirts on the merchandise section of the store have been far more popular than I ever believed that they would be. And the reason for that, I think, is people like to be aligned with the concept of responsible reptile keeping. We have a lot to shout about as reptile keepers. I think that reptiles, the welfare of reptiles on the whole, is far better than for most of the taxa. If you're looking for taxa that have it really bad welfare wise, then we've got to look at dogs, cats, rabbits, probably horses, and lots of other taxa. Reptiles do pretty well, and we should be shouting about what we do. We should be telling people, look, we're a responsible community. We care. We're passionate about what we do. We want our animals to be well. We keep them as best as we can. And we have all the science and knowledge and husbandry advice that's available today, which is far greater than ever before. We have a lot to shout about, and aligning ourselves with the responsible reptile keeping principle, I feel, is a good idea.
Yeah, I think people don't get what it was like 20 years ago because they weren't here or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it was green iguanas, and I mean, we still have problems like this, but it's so much better. Most animals at shows are CB. Most animals are happy, healthy pets. Most are, even if they're being wholesaled to a pet store, they were CB at this point, just across the board, because we're really good at making pet snakes and lizards. So like we're doing really good, like impressive, honestly.
It is. I mean, if I look back 35 years ago to when I started with reptiles, it was a very, very different world. And I look back with some cringe, but that's with the benefit of hindsight. And I also look back with some pride at the absolute revolutions and innovations of the people who were taking on animals that they'd never kept before, never seen before, nobody'd ever had one, there was no internet, there was no information, and they did their best. And from the innovations of those pioneers who were doing the work 35 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, we now have the information that we can use to keep reptiles better. Do I wish we hadn't brought in, 50,000 iguanas? Yes, I do. But through that process, we learned that it was a bad idea, that iguanas aren't the best pet, and maybe we should be breeding bearded dragons and leopard geckos instead. The whole Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles debacle. Should we have been bringing in that many 50, dime-size turtles and selling them into the pet trade? No. And we learned from that. In the UK, the pet trade, the reptile pet trade actively got together and says, hey guys, maybe we should be doing this. Maybe we should be focusing on other species, other types of pet. And the reptile pet trade self-regulated to stop doing that. These are the things we learned from our mistakes from 35 years ago. But yes, today I'm proud of the reptile hobby and trade today.
Do you think there should be more? I don't know if you want to even answer this. Do you think responsible reptile keeping should have like a list of like, hey, our rescues are full of these 3 species, so we would recommend limited pairings for very specific reasons?
We've already done that.
Okay, all right. So
we've already done that.
So do you think people listen? I don't know. Are they like, I'll do what I want? I'll breed retics in my trailer.
Well, here's the thing. We have no we have no way of enforcing anything that we say.
Right. Which is fine. Good, probably.
We aren't going to go around to anybody's house and say, we don't want to be the reptile police. We have no intention of, and we have no ability to be the reptile police. What we can do is find out information from people who know what they're talking about, from the specialists and experts and people with experience in the sectors that we're talking about, and say, hey, what message do we need to get out to the general public so that we can be more responsible reptile keeping? So there's a handful of these. So maybe we shouldn't be feeding our reptiles so much that they become obese. So maybe that's something we should address. Maybe we shouldn't be releasing our pets into the wild. Maybe we shouldn't do that.
Right.
And in the UK at least, the biggest reptile rehoming and rescue centre in the world, as far as we're aware, is based in the UK. It's the National Centre for Reptile Welfare. And they're full to the gills with common boas, just normal, bog standard common boas. And we don't really have the data to make a really strong, definitive scientific case for it. We have the experience of a guy who runs the biggest reptile centre in the world. And we know that these boas aren't bought in from the wild. We know they're not imported. We know they're not commercially bred. We don't know of any commercial breeders in the UK. So we're pretty certain that the population and the overpopulation of boas is by hobby breeding. So we put out a video recently saying, hey, this is the problem. This is how many boas there are. We're at capacity. If you were thinking of breeding your boas, maybe not, maybe don't. It's just we can make suggestions towards best practice, and that's really our job.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if you've met Americans, but they're going to be like, you can't tell me what to do. But I think, but I think just like a general nudge, being like, hey, it's going to be hard to move these kinds of animals in this market right now. That doesn't mean you need to get rid of them. You could maybe breed them in 2 years, because we could rehome this batch and the hobby grows a little bit, and you don't have to breed everything every year. I think.
And this is it. I think that the number of people who pay attention to this kind of information, when it's presented genuinely and presented in a way that's not accusatory, we don't think that boa breeders are bad people. It's just that maybe the boa breeders don't have the information that we have, and so all we want to do is give people information that they can use however they wish. If they want to still breed their boas, they will. And if they think, hey, maybe I won't breed them this year, then that's good. It's
Right.
Our job is to disseminate information. Our job is to put information out there for people to use, and that's where we'll focus.
All right. Emma asked about the great substrate debate. Is this about bearded dragons as a substrate or something else?
Yeah. Yeah, the substrate is a great one, and this is a very interesting conversation that we've had in the office here. Is that there are many people, there are many Facebook groups, and there are many magazine articles written about high-level husbandry, and we don't think we need to be another one of those news sources. We think that there are already lots of people doing research into UVB, into infrared heat sources, into the different compositions of substrates, into all of these different advanced aspects of reptile keeping, and there are people who are far cleverer than us doing it, and we shouldn't and couldn't do that. Our focus really is to stop the things happening that really come back to bite us on the bum. Stop keepers doing daft stuff that would give ammunition to the animal rights people that could be used to curtail reptile keepers. So, again, it's the invasive species thing, it's the reptile obesity thing. Those are the kind of focuses that we'll have. There are already lots and lots of resources for people to turn to find that information about which substrate's the best, or which amalgamation of lighting is the best, and there are far cleverer people than us doing it.
Right. I guess it sort of gets to like, should responsible reptile keeping be the husbandry police, which I think you're saying no. It's not. That's not like, it's just like more general topics that affect everybody equally, that are misinformation potentially, instead of like, let's get in the weeds and debate the merits of these two keeping styles that are both probably fine.
You got it. That's for people who have more expertise in that area, and if we talk about Francis Baines and Roman Murin and a handful of the other people doing really good work at that apex of reptile keeping, they do that far better than we do. So if you want that information, it's probably out there. Our job is to look after the mainstream pet level hobbyists who might be making mistakes that cause problems from a legislative perspective.
Graham asked earlier, I'm assuming this is the National Center for Reptile Wildlife, have a copy of that map when we were referring to the...
I'm not sure what that means. Say it again.
The National Center for Reptile Welfare. That's what I'm assuming that acronym means.
It is.
For collections, I'm assuming it means like collecting animals that have been dropped off at pet stores. Do they all use the same?
I'm not sure, but I think I understand. What I think he's getting at would be how that collection system happens.
Is he talking about money or animals? I thought he was talking about like dropping off animals, but maybe he means money.
Well, that's dropping off animals is a very interesting story to tell, actually, because National Centre for Reptile Welfare is based almost in the south of the country, and so getting animals there is a logistical headache. What actually happens is people will drop off their animals to one of over 100 different drop-off sites all over England and Scotland and Wales, and then they're picked up by one of the big wholesalers and dropped at the NCRW. What also happens is that when animals are found out and about in the wild, the guy at NCRW will get a call, and he'll put a call out on his social media saying, hey, there's this snake being discovered in a street in Birmingham. Who's nearby who can help? And then someone will respond to that and go and collect that animal. And the fastest response they've ever had, if my memory serves me well, is 6 minutes. From the time he put the animal on social media to the time when it was collected was 6 minutes. They do such a great job there. It's a really awesome system.
Yeah, I'm honestly jealous because we have rescues that are regional, and they're like, foster people that help them, and some people courier just like as like a foster courier. There's no even vaguely formalized way to get a slightly excess of rescue bearded dragons from city A to city B unless individuals are doing it. There's absolutely no unified. We do have a big country, but we have FedEx. So like we could
I
do it
think one of
too
the
if we
benefits that
wanted.
we have, well,
Go ahead.
perhaps, but one of the benefits that we have in the UK is that most of the stores in the UK are supplied by one of two big wholesalers. And so we have this network of logistical transportation around the country that can sort out that kind of logistical problem. And I don't think you have that wholesaler system in the USA that will send vans around the country to pick up and drop off animals.
Mm-mm. But we have FedEx. So like I always wanted like to have like a network where people could drop off at a rescue, like a real 501c3 nonprofit rescue. And then like if that one was overburdened with too many of, aquatic turtles or whatever, we would just send it to their sister satellite rescues, and then we would only need to rehome one kind of animal per state instead of trying to rehome 10 iguanas in the same state. It's just like hard to find placements for those kinds of animals. We kind of do it, but it's very cash. We don't have we almost need like a third organization, which is the rescue teamwork that just facilitates transfers of animals mostly.
Absolutely. Having the kind of logistics behind the system really does help, and having the buy-in from the trade is really helpful as well. None of these systems would work if we didn't have buy-in from the trade that wanted to self-regulate it. So
yeah, I mean, I think in the US we know we need that, because no matter what, there is a universe where even a successful sale placement of an animal could end up in that animal needing to go to a rescue to be rehomed just because they moved. It's 10 years later. So instead of them being I don't know what to do with this now.
The vast majority of animals that turn up at the National Centre for Reptile Welfare, they discern between a rescue and a rehome. Yeah. Mm-hmm. A rescue is one where someone other than the owner has approached the centre with the animal. So it might be a local authority, the police, a landlord, or even a friend or partner of the owner who realises that animal needs to live somewhere else. They're a very small proportion of the animals that arrive there. Most of the animals that arrive there are people just who have a change in life circumstances. They lose their job, they move house, they get sick. A big one is people who have died or are in such ill health and are on death's door that they need to rehome their animals. Mm-hmm. And I know that the NCRW have had a load of animals there that are really high-end animals with a value that they've said, look, I don't want to sell them. I just want you to find a really good place for it to be. The money is not the issue. They just want that animal to be looked after. So, yeah.
Right. And dogs and cats also experience these requirements where people die and need them rehomed. So it's not like a system like this means that the industry is unable to continue because it doesn't do a good job placing animals. It just means animals require continuity of care, and sometimes you need a third place to help transfer in case of situations changing. So I think it's totally normal. People are it means there's too many ball pythons, and I'm there could be too many ball pythons. So it just means they need someone to help facilitate home transfers.
Well, here's a couple of things on that note. Firstly, in the UK, there was some study I saw a while ago now that made an estimate that for every rescued or rehomed reptile, there were 20 rescued or rehomed dogs. So rescued and rehomed dogs outnumbered reptiles 20 to 1.
Think about how many cats we make every year just in the wild, and then we collect them up.
So again, reptiles score well on the welfare front. We tend to be able to look after our reptiles for longer, and this is one of the problems with reptile rehoming, is that they live too damn long. A cat or a dog's around for 8, 10, 15, 20 years if you're lucky. Yeah, hamsters around for 2 years. We all know reptiles that have been around for 25, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. They live too long. We're too good at looking after them, and they live too long. And that's what sends them to rehoming centres quite often.
Yeah, I have I did buy it from someone, but it was mostly like I was like the third hand owner of like a 20-something-year-old boa, and she's just doing great, still cracking.
Yeah,
So like
you do.
that was somebody's pet a long time ago, and
Yeah.
I was just
So,
curious, like it when she would start to look aged, and so I actually just bought her just to like have her as like
yeah,
a pet or whatever, and
see
I
her.
was like,
Yeah,
she's still doing great. So like that, yeah, that is something we have to think about in terms of like the market might be there for it now, but we have to build in the infrastructure to place these animals later when people die, literally just die,
yeah.
or get sick.
I like the snake discovery approach, which was to they have an adoption island in their store, and they have rescued and rehomed animals in their store, and they, instead of selling a bearded dragon or selling a corn snake, people can choose to rescue or rehome one from their adoption island. And that apparently is a really good way for people to get initiated into the hobby and get some good advice and get all the right products and the right kit and the right information. And yeah, everybody's happy.
Yeah, and almost, I don't know if you know this, but they will sell those animals too, potentially. It's just like, so like they don't necessarily have to like be in conflict with each other. They can, like, if you want a specific corn snake with a name and he's 4 years old, you can go get Harry. Or
Yeah,
if you want to pick the morph, you would maybe like pay not the rehoming fee, but like the whatever.
yeah.
And so like
I think it's
either of those is
50%.
totally fine, and like both of them, obviously the margins are really there on the dry goods anyway. So the store is
That's
happy
exactly
to
it.
do
Yeah.
that process. Yeah.
But interestingly, in the UK, we had a campaign a few years ago called Just Incubate 2, I think it was. And this was about bearded dragons. There was some furore went up that there were too many bearded dragons in rehoming centres. And this was before the NCRW was established, by the way. So the word was there were too many bearded dragons in rehoming centres, and instead of breeding them and incubating all the eggs, you should only incubate 2. What actually happened was the big wholesalers, the big livestock wholesalers, had to increase their importation of captive bred bearded dragons from the USA to fill the gap that left in the market. There simply weren't enough bearded dragons being produced in those years to satisfy demand. So and what we know from NCRW as well is that bearded dragons, leopard geckos, corn snakes, all of the normal stuff, it comes in large numbers, but it also goes out in large numbers. It's not a problem. It comes in and it goes out. The problem is the common boas. I think your viewer quantified his comment and was asking about the map of UK stores, which is definitely on our website.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think with boas, and we can sort of talk about this. In the US, I think there's more, not just even if you like controlled for like a per capita rate, our houses are bigger. So like you could have a bigger, you can more easily have a 6-foot enclosure. So you're 7 foot, 6 foot boa, 5 foot boa. You're like, oh, that's not a problem. So I think like we can't take prescriptions from like your rescue network to apply to how we should breed. I think we agree with that, but we would need a national, some sort of national census of what rescues are doing, and some organization to look at that to even know the answer to that question of like, what is like the rehoming rate for stuff.
Do you know what? You've hit the nail on the head there for us. So in the UK, we have a shed load of statistics, a shed load of data to work with about populations, about popular species, about the size of the trade, about how many keepers there are, about which species are ending up in rescue and rehoming centres. And one of the problems that we have in our work to become more internationally relevant is that we don't have that data from the USA, and we don't have that data from Europe either. So that's something that should really be addressed.
Yeah, and it's always tempting to be like, USARK should do that. But I don't
Well,
think USARK should do that. I think a separate not-for-profit should even
this is
like
one of the
call
five.
census, like literally call rescues, be like, what do you have this year? What's the numbers? And they could almost like survey or whatever. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, not at all. This is one of the five things that responsible reptile keeping was set up to do. And the third one on that list is research.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the things where we've lagged behind the animal rights campaigners for a very long time. They're producing a lot of research to back up their arguments. Now, quite often that research isn't really very good,
Mm-hmm.
but gone are the days when legislators and politicians and civil servants will say, hey, this is what we think about reptiles. This is what we think we should do about it. And then we come along and go, hey, that's not such a great idea. And they go, how do you know? And you say, well, I've been doing it for 35 years, so I know, and this is what you should do instead. Those days are gone. Now they say, where's your research? Where's your data? Where's your statistics? And our answer is, well, we haven't got any. We don't have that information. And that's a big hurdle for us in the political world. They're more interested in data and statistics. But even then, data and statistics don't always help if the ideological landscape, if the loudest voices are from the animal rights fraternity. We need to have a voice as well.
All right, I'm going to throw a tough one at you. Are you ready?
Another. Go on.
Yeah.
Hit me with it.
So back way up here, Emma asked about the Samson situation.
Oh, goodness me.
So USARK's choice was to be like, obviously we don't approve, but they did not, and people have criticized them for this, so I'm not like just making up something brand new or whatever. They did not like themselves take it on themselves to rehome the animals, go to law enforcement, or like do that, any of that part of it. They were just like, obviously we don't like that, but they also like didn't make a video about it, didn't do a PR statement because they didn't want to like make it more obvious something terrible was happening. This is tough, but like,
it is.
Should we go out of our way to condemn that stuff, or does it give too much evidence to AR people to use against us?
So the first thing I should point out is that I don't know much about USARK and what their priorities are and what their workload is and what the reasons in their head as to why they do one thing or the other. I've had various conversations with Phil and I have a lot of respect for him, and if Phil has come to a decision, I would be very, very surprised if it wasn't a well considered position and he would have had his reasoning. So that's the first thing. If you ask me to stick my flag in the sand, I would stick my flag with USARK and say, okay, using the knowledge that you have, you've made a decision, and I would assume that decision always to be for the best. With that being said, I think that communication is key. I think that people's hearts are won and lost by what they see on the internet, and our ability to take control of the narrative is necessary. And if we don't, then people speculate, and that's how you end up with problematic communication situations that you didn't realize were going to hit you in the face. And I'm not talking specifically about the Samson issue. We saw it over here in the UK, and I had to tell my wife not to watch the videos. Yeah.
They were horrific, everybody, if you haven't seen them.
Absolutely. And for someone with 35 years in the trade, they were horrific for me. And we didn't say anything about it either, largely because we'd only just established ourselves and we didn't understand the situation and we don't know what went on, and we didn't know the best way to go about communicating it. I think if in situations where we have information, in situations where we understand what's going on and the nuance and context outside of the internet furore, then we absolutely should communicate. But the internet furore was such a, am I allowed to say shit show?
Yeah, 100%.
It was awful. There were people wanted to do the best thing, and they were doing a good thing by outing him.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a very, very messy situation, and we should be endeavouring to stop that happening. Whatever that takes, we should be endeavouring to stop that happening. I don't know what more USR could have done if they'd have put out a social media post saying this was awful. Would that be enough? Should they have sent people round to confiscate animals? Should they have informed their local enforcement organisation? It's difficult to know at what point advocacy organisations have a remit to be the police. It's difficult to know.
Right. I think people just wanted, like George says it, like a more public condemnation. Just one statement. It's like, we do not approve of animal keeping that looks like this. And here's our standards for animal keepers, and that's it. Like, it sounded like that, I think, would have been nice. It would have been, I know they think that, like,
yeah,
but
I maybe guess that they felt like that was already done. That had been already, that nail had already been hammered. Perhaps. I speculate because I don't know. But yeah, maybe just a statement, Emma. I agree.
Yeah, it's I don't have a strong opinion either way, because so I am not, I guess I am media, but I don't think of myself that way, but I probably should, because that gets me in trouble. But I spend a lot of time thinking about, like, the optics of certain decisions. And sometimes if someone does something bad that you know about in private, and you're like, would I rather, like, destroy them publicly, or, like, cause a fucking ruckus over this that I know is bad, right? But
I know that
I could reel them back in with honey, right? I could teach them, or privately, and then they could just, like, magically one day appear and be on the right side of whatever it is.
Well, that's where we've kind of positioned ourselves. And what I do know is that in the UK, the advocacy organisations and the big players in the community do work to put right the wrongs of the bad players in our community. I know that there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes that you wouldn't want to air your dirty laundry in public, but I know that happens behind the scenes. We had a supporter email us and say, hey, how do you decide which people that you will, which stores you will accept as members, and which social media channels you'll follow and like? And we were like, okay, why do you ask? And he said, well, there's this one here, it's a real problem, he does this and this, and I don't think you should be aligning yourselves with him. And so again, my wife and I sat in the office to decide how we were going to deal with this. And we come to the conclusion that we couldn't be and shouldn't be the reptile police. Whose standards would we enforce? Who has the knowledge to be able to say this is right and this is wrong? And that's definitely not us. Who would we send to inspect those places? Where would we get those resources from to achieve that kind of thing? So we decided that anyone who joins responsible reptile keeping would, one would hope, aspire to live up to that concept. And maybe they're not at their best game right now, but by following our lead and by following our community and by looking at the people in our community who are posting and what they're doing, maybe they get led in that direction. And that's what I'd hope for. There's a friend of mine who says that the extreme end of reptile keeping is leaving normal hobbyists behind, and instead of trying to bring them up, they're just condemning them. And very soon we'll arrive at a point where only the greatest, most qualified doctorate of herpetology will be allowed to keep reptiles, and everybody else is considered to be bad players. We don't want to do that. We want to raise standards. We want to help people who need that nudge in the right direction, and that's what we aim to do.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's like a form of like gatekeeping, like ethical
Yeah,
gatekeeping. You're like, well,
yeah,
if you can't buy it a second house for your bearded dragon, like an entire additional home,
yeah,
not
yeah.
allowed to keep it.
And
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
where some people are heading with that kind of message.
yes. To me, they're like, don't at me, anybody on the internet. I don't want to hear it. But like that is the most insidious part, right? Because they're from the inside. The call's coming from inside the house, and you're like, hello?
Yeah,
You're doing it. You're doing something that is going to destroy the hobby from within by being like,
yeah.
guess we can't have any pets now. And then you're like, so
Again,
I
this.
I agree with all that. I have like my own like moral quandary where I'm like, I don't like this person extra. Right? Like, they sent a snake dead in a box or whatever, or threw a still living gargoyle gecko in the trash can. And then
Yeah,
you're like, but right now we agree on something.
yeah.
So do I support, let me just be honest, US ARC, even though there are people on their board that I don't like. Wink. Yes, I think for right now, yes, because maybe they can be better one day. Maybe we can be
Well,
optimists.
I look at this as a net force for good. And if you look at the work that advocacy organisations all over the world do, they are all a net force for good. They may not do things that you like sometimes, they may not be responding perfectly, but on the whole, they are a net force for good and they deserve our support, and we'd be in a much more difficult place without them.
All right, tough talk coming.
Yeah,
Samson was a US ARC member. Phil Goss was made aware of the image before they were released and elected to do nothing, and then warned against their release. So I guess there is a bridge too far, right? Like if someone, there has to be a threshold. You don't think you can bring them back, but I think that the default position should be, can we help them do better,
yeah.
right?
I mean, we can't talk specifically about Samson here because that's a really extreme
Right.
example, you know, and that's not really. If Samson happens over here, and we realize, in fact, it has happened. Something very similar has happened, and they were outed on the internet, and their collection was distributed because they were basically hoarding.
Mm-hmm.
That should be highlighted, and we should be seen to be self-regulating. That's always a good position for the community to be in. It'd be interesting to speak to Phil at some point about this situation and find out what his views on it are, because it would also inform us. We're rookies at this advocacy thing, and
Mm-hmm.
something like this is going to land in our lap at some point, and right now I don't know what would be the best way to deal with it. I can speculate, and I think I have good ideas, largely, he says, hopefully. But I think an informed decision from somebody who's been there, done that, and made those decisions would be useful for us to canvass.
Yeah, it's hard. I agree. Like I like that the hobby got together, made a Facebook group, basically like team grassrooted themselves and got everybody on board, because some people knew in secret that he was not a great keeper and he had problems, and we got it out there, and so like he could maybe go do a different job now. Maybe I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but I don't know.
It's such a
It's
difficult
hard.
situation. What I don't think there is a good resolution. I don't think there is a good answer. Those animals were abused, and I don't think any good comes from that position. Everything that happens thereafter is only sad and horrible and damaging.
Mm-hmm.
It's damage limitation.
Yeah, Will and so subservient. I don't think you're being argumentative. I think we're all like wrestling with like the dual concern of like, obviously nobody approves of this, but how do we communicate it effectively that it doesn't hurt us collectively, and
Yeah,
but still help someone who's like new and doesn't know what UVB is yet, and they just needed
you
to be
got it.
taught, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
It's and there's so many nuances, and this is something that we always knew, but it's becoming increasingly apparent. is that conversations on the internet are they're almost always polarized.
Mm-hmm.
It's black and white. They're very short responses to very large subjects, very detailed topics, and it's difficult to get the tone exactly right on the internet because there's always a lot more going on than is evident, and it's a problem.
Right. What do you think about influencers that get bit by cobras or retakes in their face? Or
Please stop. Please
I
stop.
was giving you an example for views. Or they like catch berms in Florida, but they may have planted those berms just for the thumbnail or whatever. What do you think about all those things?
Here's the thing. So YouTube and the internet in general is set up for entertainment. That's its job, and it credits and promotes entertainment. So if you do something that's entertaining, you get more clicks, more views, more money, more profile, more everything. So the motivation for people to do things that are entertaining for that purpose is very high. Whereas at the other end of the scale, you've got education. And if you've ever read a scientific paper or, a herpetological study, they're not that entertaining. Yeah. So they're not going to get lots of clicks.
But it's like eating candy versus eating your fiber. One of them's going to come out.
We know what's
way,
right.
One of them's going to come out a different way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is what I'm saying about the reptile community probably not being the best at, presenting itself well on social media. There's a lot of ways that it can look extreme and sensationalized, and especially to the untrained eye, and it's not a good visual for us. If you want to free handle your cobra in the privacy of your own home, and then one day you die of stupid, then that's okay, because we don't want to take away your freedoms to do the things that you want to do. I've never been bungee jumping. I've never been skydiving. I've handled king cobras, which is probably more dangerous, but I didn't do it on camera. And if I died of my own stupidity, then that's fair enough. But to put it on camera for other people to see is probably not a good look.
Do you remember? I know everybody has like nostalgia glasses for Steve Irwin, but do you remember how everyone was like, "This fucking guy keeps tailing stuff," and it was like the most vitriolic part of like a forum in like 2000 or and like everyone's like very happy about it, but he was, no offense, everybody, like the crazy, over the top, not good reptile presenter. Because like Jeff Corbin would use hooks and stuff, and everyone was like, he's so boring. But him or
he made good TV.
What's the beard guy? I forget his name.
Mark O'Shea.
Mark O'Shea. Those were like
he's a good friend of mine.
Real guy. We should have a party. I think it'd be a riot. And so people misremember that, but like that version of sensationalism that's good TV is its grandson, like this what we have now. So like I'm not surprised. It's still what the general audience wants to see because they were like trained to that. Yeah. But at least like Steve Irwin tried to be educational.
Well, people used to say to me, "What do you think? What do you think of this Steve Irwin guy? Is he just for show or is he for real?" I was like, "Well, he's for real, but you could achieve all of the things that he's achieving with far less stress, hassle, sensationalism, and risk. And you're going to get away with it most of the time, but then one day maybe you won't. But
yeah, it's wild how people. I just remember people being so mad at him, and like it was almost as strong and vitriolic as like a Venomoid debate in like the old forums, and you're like, I don't know, I don't keep venomous.
My thoughts are I don't really like to put people down for what they do on screen, because it depends. If we say, okay, this is bad, this is the worst thing that's happening, we shouldn't do this. Okay, so we've stopped doing this. And then this thing is bad, so let's stop doing this. We head in the same direction as the extreme husbandry people. Yeah, where do you draw the line? At what point is it acceptable, and by whose measure is this acceptable or not? There's a guy I know who thinks that, a very creditable reptile guy, a few years younger than me, thinks Steve Irwin is the best thing to ever happen to reptile keeping. And
it probably is, like, in sort of cosmic.
Yeah, there's a lot of credit in that. Again, we're talking about nuances. We're talking about people's opinions coming from different places about different levels of, fine details. One day he did something great, and the next day he did something not quite so great. But then we have to make a blanket statement: is Steve Irwin good or bad? It's too nuanced, isn't it?
Yeah. Life is complicated, and so are humans. My God.
The ones I know, at least.
I wish we could have those simple humans again. All right. I think we did all of our fun, controversial topics. So, can we talk about the UK market since Brexit? Because people have asked me a lot, like, should I start a ball python breeding business in the UK? And I'm like, I literally don't know. I'm not sure.
Well, it's already been done. That's the thing.
Right.
I mean, I know the USA is quite insular, but we do have ball pythons over here in the UK. They're called royal pythons.
I'll start calling them royals from now on.
To be clear, yeah, just so you know. But yeah, we've been breeding royals over here for years, for almost as long as you guys have. And there are some established breeders over here producing some really good high-end stuff. I know that our breeders come over to you and sell in America and bring stuff back as well. So do you think that the UK is a good market for royals? 2 years ago I would have said no, because we were already doing it, and even more emphatically now, seeing as the backside has seemingly dropped out of the market in the UK and seemingly in America to a degree as well.
Yeah, it's the whole system is sort of it's still chugging along gently, but it's not that like feverish pace it was 2 years ago.
I know a lot of people getting rid of collections and selling what we would have called aspirational morphs for way bottom cheaper prices.
So tell people pre-Brexit how the UK intersected with the rules and like courier system with EU, because I think that's an important like change since then.
Well, largely it was as if the English Channel didn't exist. It was as if we were another landmass attached to Europe, and we could go back and forth with any animals we liked. Now that's all changed, and for CITES species you need to, let's imagine I go to Ham next month, and I see an animal, let's say Tarantola chevalier, helmeted gecko. I've wanted a helmeted gecko for ages, and let's say they have one there. I couldn't bring one back now because there's too much paperwork involved, and the French customs don't like you bringing stuff through there. Let's pick a CITES species, you'd have to decide what you wanted before you went, get an import permit and an export permit and a vet certificate to bring that CITES animal back. So you can't just walk around Ham anymore and cherry pick stuff, or impulse buy, so to speak. That can't happen anymore, and the amount of hassle involved in taking non-CITES stuff and non-commercial is still too much of a headache for anybody to be bothered with. So the transactions between Europe and the UK have slowed down significantly. You are supposed to be able to bring back non-commercial, i.e. not for sale, non-CITES species. You're still supposed to be able to do that with impunity, but I know that the French customs cause so much hassle. They either have complete disregard or no knowledge of the actual rules. And
how would you prove that it's not commercial? Be like, this is my pet, and I used to live in Spain. And
exactly.
I moved home or whatever.
There's so many. trip hazards in the way of transporting animals between here and Europe now, that doesn't happen too much. It was estimated that about 5,000 Brits went over to Ham before Brexit, and now it's a fraction of that apparently. So
I heard Ham was quiet the last time, and I didn't know if that was because like the market was sort of settling down a little bit, or if it's, I mean, it's
I'd
been
heard the
2
same.
years since Brexit, but like, you know what I mean? Like there's just less interest. I
Yeah.
don't know what like the EU interest level is in the hobby, because they have their own sort of like, you know, particular
exactly.
ways of wanting to keep, and so they
Yeah.
keep different kinds of things.
Yeah, I heard that Ham was quiet over the last couple of years as well. Although this forthcoming one in next month is probably the busiest one of the year that I'm attending, so I'll report back on that. But I think there's a lot of stuff happening that would make the entire trade and the entire community quiet, and Brexit certainly being one of those things. But the other thing is the cost of living and inflationary issues that we're having over here, especially in the UK. That has hit stores and keepers really hard. The rescue centres have seen increases. I've got some notes here. Where was that? Oh yeah, the NCRW saw a 48% increase rate, and stores have seen a 90% increase rate in people who can no longer keep their animals because of the energy crisis. It's hit us particularly badly over here in the UK.
Is there any like, I don't know, this is maybe like too far off, but like thoughts of like telling people to buy pets that don't need extra hot wattage bulbs? You know,
have you
like
ever
a
been to
crested
England?
gecko.
Have you ever been to
No,
the
but
UK?
I've watched enough TV.
It's
I assume
cold
it's
here.
cold.
It's cold.
I
Yeah,
mean, you could do like, you know, temperate colubrids, New Caledonian geckos, and sort of keep them in like your bedroom where it's slightly warmer. So, but they don't need like, you know, 100-watt bulb on your monitor to make it a 120 hotspot. Like ways of like pivoting the hobby internally to make it meet people's lifestyles easier. Is that a thing? I don't even know.
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's much capacity for that to occur. The UK is probably colder than you realise, and most animals will need some kind of supplemental heat. You know, okay, so New Caledonia geckos they're okay in colder temperatures, but you wouldn't want to inflict that on them long term. You know, it's not an environmental parameter that you'd enforce on them because it's adverse. So yeah, no, I think it's just a case of if you can afford to keep your animal, then get one, but you ought to really be deciding whether or not you can afford to keep an animal before you get one. Things are turning around here. You know, we had the COVID spike of people going out and getting more animals, or doing up their enclosures that they had got, or buying the animals that they'd always wanted because, you know, nobody was going to work, and you had all these checks coming from the government that you could spend, and I'm sure that happened in the USA as well. And so what we've got is a massively fulfilled demand that was pre-filled during the COVID era, and now everybody's back at work, and the cost of living, inflationary crisis in the UK has hit, and it's caused a contraction, and the whole trade has felt that. You know, and it's supposed to be turning around a little bit. There are some light at the end. There is some light at the end of the tunnel in that respect, but certainly the UK's got a way to go yet before it's back to the glory days.
Yeah, you need some more colonies. I don't know.
But Brexit's kind of been a good and a bad thing for us in the UK. So it's a bad thing in terms of transporting animals. That's just a universally bad thing. And it's a bad thing because apparently there's some part of European law that outlaws and prohibits positive lists from happening. So if you're in Europe, there's apparently some part of EU law that means you can't impose a positive list. Now, because we're not part of the EU anymore, we're probably not protected by that legislation. So we missed out on that. But there are also benefits to us leaving Europe, and specifically the invasive species issues that inflict Europe that can be really problematic. So let's use Lampropeltis getula for an example. So Lampropeltis getula became invasive in the Canary Islands, where I actually spend a lot of time. And the Canary Islands are off the coast of Africa. They're closer to Africa than they are to Europe, and they eat the native lizards. So there you go. So good idea. Let's make them an invasive species in the Canary Islands. Let's also think about making them an invasive species in other climates where Lampropeltis king snakes might be able to live. That's not the UK. King snakes could not live in the UK, could not become invasive in the UK or Poland or Sweden or Norway or any of the other kind of, cooler parts of Europe. But European legislation is for invasive species and is an all or nothing affair. You either impose it across the whole of Europe or you don't. You can't say, oh no, Britain, you don't need to worry about it. That didn't happen. So when Lampropeltis getula was banned in Europe, they were banned in Britain as well, which was ridiculous because they can't become invasive here. Now, because we're not part of Europe anymore, we get the opportunity to say, well, hey, we don't think that's a good law for the UK, so we're not gonna impose it. We're not bound by European law anymore. And also the British political system is a bit more sensible than the European system in that respect, in that we have stakeholder engagement in the UK. Did we discuss previously about the EU invasive laws, and you either have to accept the whole list or
Yeah,
none
but
of the
tell
list?
them that because they don't know that.
It's crazy. So when the EU is making invasive laws about invasive species that they want to ban, most countries will propose a species that they would like to add to the invasive list. So Germany will propose a species, and Spain will propose a species. Maybe Britain will or won't, and you'll end up with a list of species proposed by various different countries. Now, the situation with this European law was you either approve the whole list and the whole list gets banned across Europe, or you disapprove the whole list and it doesn't get banned. So if Germany has proposed a species that it desperately needs to be on that list and desperately needs to be banned, they're not going to throw out the whole list. They're going to say, yeah, but there might be something on that list that's just not suitable to be banned in Germany. There might be something on that list that's not suitable to be banned in the UK, but you can't cherry pick it. You have to say, yes, we'll take the whole list, or no, we won't take the list. It's crazy.
Did the Lampropeltis ban happen pre-Brexit, and then people got rid of their king snakes, and then I don't know the timing of events, and then they could have them again, or was it after?
So the Lampropeltis ban was actually proposed, I think it was 4 times, and overturned by the EU Scientific Committee, and it kept getting reformed and rejigged and reproposed and put forward again, and eventually it was accepted. And I think that was, I think it was 2021. Oh God, somebody's going to come and tell me
Brexit?
I'm wrong.
I can remember somewhat recently seeing like, hey, these are for export. They're being banned, like gray band king snakes, Mexican black king snakes from like commercial breeders in like Germany or whatever. And I'm like, that's a lot of animals to move out of everywhere.
Well, if you've got the animals, you're allowed to keep them with grandfather rights. So you're allowed to keep them until they die, but you weren't allowed to breed them, weren't allowed to sell them, and weren't allowed to transport them. So that really made every Lampropeltis getula in Europe a pet. And some of them weren't pets. Some of them were breeding projects.
Right.
Some of them were, from breeders. So yeah, they basically became zero value.
Right. They're like economic refugees because they were from like commercial operations or large scale breeders, not like hobby breeders. You're like, they need to go somewhere if they're going to. Did they end up, some of them in the UK? I don't know the disposition, because like if they come back to the US, they're not that expensive here.
Yeah. As far as I'm aware, there wasn't a great influx of Lampropeltis into the rescue centres. I think my contact there would have given me that information if it existed. So I'm pretty sure it didn't turn into much of a problem. And I don't think they were particularly popular. They're certainly not on the list of most popular species. So
Okay.
I remember in the 80s and 90s, they were really popular. But,
Mm-hmm.
they were just behind corn snakes. But I think they've dropped off in popularity in that time. So I don't think it was a huge problem. But my position on this has always been one of principle. If if you just swallow that ban, because, it's not that much of a problem, it's not that many animals, it's not that many keepers, it's not that much of a big deal. It just sends a message that you're pliable. It sends a message that, even unfair legislation can be imposed upon you. And I don't think we should be sending that message. We should be making legislation that's fair and proportionate and useful.
Yeah, I mean this one's tough because like they didn't just ban cow kings, so they banned the whole genus.
Yeah, speckled kings, black kings,
And so like not only is it like they banned it for everywhere, even though that one couldn't live everywhere, they just were like, oh, fuck it, just ban all of them.
exactly.
So like it was very
Disproportionate,
actually like weirdly
overreaching.
wide overreaching
Yeah,
response.
disproportionate, overreaching, and actually unenforceable.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, in Norway, they had a reptile ban in Norway from, I think it was 1979 to, was it 2017, something like that. So like a good few years. And in that time, a government estimated that there were 110,000 reptiles in Norway during the complete ban, where there was supposed to be none. And at the same time, there was a thriving industry of stores supplying, goods and foods and products to those keepers.
For
But
the
it did
reptiles that
not,
didn't exist.
for reptiles that didn't exist. And there were it actually caused welfare issues, because if you own a reptile that you're not supposed to have, you can't take it to a vet. You can't go
Right.
asking for advice from people who know what they're talking about. So the welfare of those animals, because of the ban, because of the positive list, because of the absolute ban, was compromised. And since then, they brought in a positive list in Norway. And whereas in other parts of Europe, the animal rights fraternity think that a positive list is a good thing for welfare, in Norway, the animal rights groups said it was a terrible thing for welfare because they were allowed to be kept now. So then they couldn't make their mind up as to whether a positive lister is a good thing or a bad thing, dependent on where it is and what it's doing. It's
They're just
craziness.
trying to see what sticks to the wall. They don't actually care about
That's right.
welfare. They just want you to not have it.
If
All
they
right,
cared about
speaking of
welfare, they'd leave us alone.
right. Speaking of stupid bans, Spain. Let's do
Oh,
Spain. What?
oh,
How did they ban ball pythons? I know it's a
uh,
little bit of a story, but let's do it.
well, I should give credit for this story to a friend of mine who's got the most awesome Spanish-sounding name that I've ever heard. It's Jose Lopez Sanchez, and he's the
third. Is he a
he's
third?
awesome. He's the chairman of the Valencia Herpetological Society. So the story goes that in something like 2017, someone saw how many ball pythons were being imported into Spain and thought, oh, that's terrible, that awful thing to happen. And they did a risk assessment to find out whether ball pythons could become invasive in Spain. So Mediterranean Spanish habitat compared with West African habitat, it doesn't take too much of a genius to realise that they're not similar, and that ball pythons really couldn't become invasive in Spain. In fact, I don't know anywhere where ball pythons have become established outside their range. So
Gotta be on the equator, because ball pythons
yeah,
like shrivel up
yeah. Well,
if they're not, just the right
yeah.
parameters.
So this risk assessment was routinely ridiculed. Everybody who looked at it realised how bad it was, realised what a farce it was, and it was ridiculed and ignored and put in a drawer and forgotten about for several years. And then, a few years later, the government changed, and an animal activist or an eco-activist came to some relative position of power and found this report and decided to use it as ammunition to ban ball pythons. And that's what they did outright, overnight. Ball pythons, savanna monitors, and peninsula cooters. Just ban them all
It's
overnight.
for me, a random assortment of animals.
Well, kind. I mean, the Santa Monica ball pythons will have come in on that same shipment,
Right.
so you know they'll
What
have
did the
used those
cooters
as a.
do to anybody?
I
They
don't
just
know.
why just that one, or not all? Like, I don't know, like the
Well,
Emmys.
this is where science is lacking, and even a lack of science, you know, doesn't stop this from happening. You know, science isn't the answer to the problem completely anymore. It used to be, but it's not. So they're banned overnight. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
ball pythons, savanna monitors banned overnight. So from there, then the Valencia Herpetological Society managed to raise enough funds. I think it was about 12,000 euros, which I think is probably the same in dollars. It's close anyway. 12,000 euros to take this thing to court.
Mm-hmm.
And this happened during COVID, by the way, which is significant. And they got a few experts together to produce enough scientific evidence to show what rubbish this risk assessment was. So they presented it all in court, and they showed the judge why this risk assessment that says they could become invasive was rubbish. And at the end of it, the judge essentially said, well, yeah, I hear what you're saying, you know, but we're going to ban them anyway. Yeah, we're going to keep the ban on a precautionary principle just in case. And so the ban's still in place. I don't think it stopped anybody from keeping ball pythons. You were supposed to if you own a ball python, you were supposed to register it. And they did a Freedom of Information Act in Spain to find out how many people in their local province had registered their ball python. I think he said 7. And we know there was more than 7 ball pythons in that area. Yeah. And from there, the same government then brought in positive lists. So recently they brought in positive lists for reptiles, birds, mammals, invertebrates, fish, and some other stuff. And their only hope was that the recent election would kick out the government that caused all these problems and bring in a new, more sympathetic government. But that didn't exactly go to plan either. So they're left with these absolutely abhorrent, useless, unenforceable laws that are problematic for welfare. We know that lots of people have been raided in Spain, people who've been keeping animals for years, been in touch with their enforcement officers, been in touch with their CITES officers, and then the new staff that the CITES officers have put in place have decided to reinterpret the laws and then go and visit the people that they already knew had these animals, raid their homes, confiscate their animals, and that's happened. So a friend of mine had his entire collection taken and distributed around Spain, and many of those animals have recently died. I know of a guy who was running a parrot breeding project, and he had parrots from a few of his friends that he put into one facility. The CITES officers knew about this facility and knew what was happening, understood it, had approved it. The new CITES officers went in and said, no, we don't like this. They threw the guy and his elderly wife, disabled wife, on the floor, handcuffed them, confiscated all their animals, distributed them around Spain, and they all died.
Oh my God. That's a terrible story you just told me.
It's and that's the pinnacle of it. That's not even the worst of it. There's a lot more to that story, but you get the gist.
Hopefully you can get a long, like, interview style podcast on that one, or like a movie or something.
We are going to produce that film. We've got a few interviews lined up with people in Spain who've been through this process, because we're going through a similar situation here in the UK, where animal rights extremists are being involved in making laws and creating recommendations and government advisory reports that, if they were implemented, would close down the whole of the reptile trade in the UK. And these reports get ridiculed at first, but if they get reanimated, what happened in Spain could easily happen here. What happened in the UK?
It's almost like they're doing, I don't know, like the boiling frog in the pot metaphor. Like, they put something out, everyone's like, that's ridiculous. But because it sits and exists in, like, the Byzantine system, enough eyes touch it, they're like, it doesn't seem that ridiculous because it's been here for 4 years in this folder. Yeah, let's do it. It's almost like how it feels like it's working. So the more they like, do that, like, touches, they like touch someone's brain with the idea that, oh yeah, this is great. They end up
Well, that's
getting their way
absolutely
in
what
the end
happens.
anyway.
That's absolutely what happens. The thing to be considerate of is that outright bans are problematic, yes, but what actually happens is that these laws come in to close down reptile keeping through the back door. It's excessive administration, so that in order to be compliant with legislation, fewer people are wanting to jump through those hoops and do those things and put in that effort, spend that time, tick those boxes, make those phone calls. And so people are like, oh no, I'm not going to keep reptiles, I'm not going to sell reptiles, I'm not going to work with reptiles. And that's it. It's the excessive bureaucracy and administration that's closing down the reptile trade slice by slice. And that's what we're facing. In the UK, we had a recent report come out on the government website about enclosure sizes. And what had happened was, about 2 years ago, one of the big animal rights campaigners in the UK pestered our government so hard about enclosure sizes that the UK government department set up a working group to discuss the topic. And the working group consisted of largely farm vets. They're called the Animal Welfare Council, and they're largely farm vets. But also on there was the chairman, who was a known anti-reptile keeper, and as consultants they had two animal rights extremists who had an overt position of wanting to close down the reptile trade. Our reptile advocacy organisations only heard about this working group through the back door and kind of bullied their way into being involved. So we had a couple of guys on that committee giving our side of the story. And this was a couple of years ago. And during that process, during those meetings, the reptile guys were roundly ignored and sidelined, and all of the recommendations from the animal rights people were put into the final report, or at least the draft of the final report that was issued. And then silence for 2 years. Nothing happened, and everybody hoped that report had been thrown into the long grass or forgotten about. And then the chairman of the AWC died, so they released the report about 2 months ago, and it was an absolute nightmare. The initial proposals by the animal rights activists were that every reptile enclosure in a reptile store had to be 1.5 times the length of the snake by 1.5 times the length of the snake by 1.5 times the length. So that would have meant a typical corn snake would need a 9 foot by 9 foot by 9 foot enclosure. And that's what they wanted in pet stores. As it happens, they've just brought it down to, in the report, to be 1 times snake length by 2/3, which for temporary enclosures like in a pet store is absolutely ridiculous. And most pet stores could not exist under those rules. So we've put together a lot of reports along with the other advocacy organisations to refute this information, to discredit and largely ridicule this recommendation to government. So we're hoping that it will be ignored. But the story sounds very much like the Spanish ball python invasive species report that was ridiculed and ignored and put in a bottom drawer until a few years later somebody comes to power and finds it and decides to use it instead. We shouldn't be going through this process. We shouldn't have to tolerate this kind of ridiculousness and these proposals that are unscientific.
Is like the Wales government or Scotland government better, like for their regional stuff, or is everybody a cluster? I guess that's the question, because obviously, like, there's different smaller legislative bodies for each region.
The animal welfare in the UK is devolved to the states. So England gets to write its own laws, Wales gets to write its own laws, and Scotland gets to write its own laws. So basically Wales and Scotland watched England make an absolute mess of its legislation in 2018 that regulated reptile stores and pet stores in general, watched us make an absolute mess of it, and then wrote their own legislation, which was better in many ways, but still had some major clunks and unique clunks. They managed to come up with some brand
Wow.
new ones.
What a bunch
Yeah,
of characters.
yeah. So we were speaking to Pets Canada recently about their impending animal pet store legislation there, and along with a colleague of mine called Dave Perry from the Companion Animal Sector Council, we had a conversation with them and we said, look, we'll send you the English, Welsh and Scottish laws with big red lines through the bits that you might want to ignore. And hopefully what will happen is that Canada will make some preferable legislation to which then us in England, Scotland and Wales can say, hey, look at this Canadian legislation. They've made a really good job of it. Can we bring some of that back over here?
Right.
But
do you think that's how it'll be fixed? Or like, I mean, do you guys do a good job of being like, we repeal? Like sometimes that happens in like a US state where they're like, at a national level, no, we rarely go back. But like, or do you need to just have a new version that's better?
Well, it's such a complex issue again. And I think it was a real opportunity to improve welfare that was missed. Most of the burdens for reptile stores are administrative and have no bearing on welfare. So previously, reptile stores had to go around and record the temperature in every single enclosure every day. Yeah. Which meant that some of them had to employ people, and humidity and UV light. Yeah.
Oh.
So,
I mean, I had to do that when I worked in a pet store, but we just wrote it on a piece of paper and I don't know. I just ignored it.
You had to record it. What they have to do now, after it's been adapted, is to just record any anomalies. So, like, the assumption is that everything was fine unless it's listed, and that you've listed the error, the anomaly, the mistake. Yeah. So that's worth doing. They're also going through a process right now where they're looking for feedback, or at least I think they've had feedback from stores to say, hey, we're looking at tweaking this legislation. How's it been rolling for the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years, or however long it's been, 5 years, I think. And stores have had an opportunity to feedback, say, look, this has been problematic, this has been useless, this has been, and there are some adaptations being made. So that's good news. So there is that process, but you know what? It's much more difficult to change a law that was ridiculous in the first place than it is to make the law work right up front. So
does Canada have a standard pet store rule nationally already, or are they implementing it new?
I think they're implementing it new. I've only had a few conversations with those guys, and they're looking for case studies and tests that have been done elsewhere. I think Colorado in the USA has some legislation that's used as the gold standard, isn't it?
I don't know. I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah.
Is it?
Colorado is apparently waved around as a good set of rules, but I haven't seen them, so I can't vouch for them. But they're also looking at Colorado's.
I mean, the U.S. is a living nightmare. So the rules are all different everywhere you go, no matter what you're doing. But like I don't know of very many states that have care standard rules for pet stores, period. Which maybe should be changed. I don't know. I'm not, in charge. But like,
well, the UK is the most highly regulated pet sector in the world. We have the most regulations. We have the most. So it baffles me why the UK is under so much pressure, and the trade especially is under so much pressure to improve welfare when we already have the most stringent and demonstrable good welfare in the UK. If there were welfare issues, we have people in stores recording welfare issues by law to present to their local authority inspectors. If there were significant welfare issues, we would know. We would have that data. And there just isn't that data.
Right. I mean, it probably has more to do with like the density of AR propaganda, which sounds weird.
Yeah, we have our fair share of nutters in the UK. Yeah, we have.
That's one way to put it.
No, we've got more than our fair share. We've got our fill of them.
How much control does, I don't know, either your national level government or local government have over keeping? Like, does like the town of like a little hamlet go like, no snakes here, or
No, there
do they make a
there are no local
bylaw like
bans.
that? Okay.
No. If you consider each European country to be like an American state, that's more of a decent comparison. So you could assume that England, Scotland, or Wales would make a law, or Germany, or Spain, or Italy would make a law that was, state specific, very much like Ohio or Florida, or would make a law. But no, it's not like a small town in the West Country could say, right, no snakes. That doesn't happen.
So okay, so I guess we're worse off in that way, because any
Do you get
version,
towns?
yeah, they're like, only in this parish of Louisiana, all retics banned, and so you could cross the county line and go keep a retic or whatever. So like we have to like put our reptile shows in city limits or counties that allow the full range of species, because if just like one nut job gets on the board, they're like, I really hate big snakes. Nothing over
Nut jobs
6
on
feet.
the board. Nut jobs on the board.
So that's different.
Well, we did have a similar occurrence over in the UK regarding reptile shows.
Mm-hmm.
So the Doncaster show has been run by the International Herpetological Society in the UK for, at least a decade or maybe 2 decades, and oh god, I should know this, but it's been a long time that we've had the show at Doncaster, and it's at the Doncaster Racecourse. So racecourses are pretty used to dealing with animal rights extremists, and it's been run there for decades. We have local authority inspectors there. We have vets on site to look after the animals. The local authority has said that there are no welfare issues. Everybody knows that the quality of the show is good. But then the local mayor changed, and the mayor decided that if Doncaster Racecourse held that show again, then they wouldn't license that company to have the racecourse anymore. So now we've been jumping around the UK with different venues.
Right.
Yeah. That get
but
put under lots of pressure.
Was more humane than a reptile
show?
Like 2 AR people. Horse racing is more humane, or
I don't know, but
I don't know.
The UK's had a problem with.
I have watched the Jeremy Clarkson farming video, which is like the show, which I'm sure is not a great representation of what your people are dealing with. But I always find it funny because he's always complaining about not being able to like farm, like grow animals because of rules. So this is all it reminds me of. It's just like excessive rules, which basically like put all chances of like keeping animals profitably out of business. And would you like describe it that way for the?
Absolutely. Okay. So we've had a problem in the UK with reptile shows since the 1990s. Yeah, that was really the beginning of the animal rights campaigning in the UK, trying to stop reptile shows. And the reason there's a problem is because there's a law was imposed, I think in the 1950s, that stopped animals from being sold from market stalls outdoor at marketplaces in London. I think it was Petticoat Lane. And if you went down Petticoat Lane in the 50s or the 60s, I can't remember when it was, you could buy monkeys, you could buy iguanas, you could buy, anything, stacked high in cages. And so they said, right, we're making it illegal to sell animals from a market stall. And quite rightfully so, because those places were abhorrent, of course. Yeah.
Right.
Fast forward to 1990, and the animal rights campaigners took the reptile shows to court because they said that we were selling animals from a market stall. When, of course, reptile shows are a very different environment from the reason the law was made. They're run by enthusiasts, they're run by passionate people, they're run by knowledgeable people. The animals are in those enclosures or those containers for very short periods of time. But it was a disingenuous use of a legal loophole to close down those. But that was a while ago now. That law is still in place, and the law means that anybody who's a reptile store or who is a business, who is a licensed business, cannot sell livestock at those shows. Only hobbyists with excess breeding stock can sell livestock at those shows. So some of the most professional, knowledgeable, inspected, accountable reptile keepers in the country, i.e. stores, can't exhibit at a reptile show. They also tried to say that the reptile shows were a hotbed for infections, and particularly salmonella. So they put out some communication saying, if you've ever caught salmonella from a reptile show, we will take on your legal case and win you some money. There's a system over here called no win, no fee. So you go to court, and if you win, you get some money, and if you don't win, you don't have to pay anything. Yeah, no win, no fee. So there was this no win, no fee communication from animal rights. If you've caught salmonella at a reptile show, we'll take it to court for you.
Did they find anybody?
Zero.
Yeah.
Zero. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody's licking their turtles' butts at the reptile show last time I checked.
They also said that the shows were a hotbed for invasive species, and they made a list of species that had been found at these shows, included dendrobates, poison frogs, and the idea that poison frogs can become invasive in the freezing cold of Doncaster, northern Britain, is just ludicrous. But,
if they could, that would be metal. Like, they would be the most intense. Like, we have.
That's a hardcore frog.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is it. If you say things loud enough, you say things loud enough, you say things often enough, they become
right. It sounds
true.
like it makes sense to anybody who doesn't know what poison dart frogs are, right?
Yeah. Well, they attack us on. They attack us on really 4 or 5 different platforms all the time on welfare. And there is no evidence to say that the UK has a significant issue with reptile welfare, and any reptile welfare issue for reptiles there is in the UK is dwarfed when compared with other taxa. They talk about zoonoses, and this was particularly an issue when COVID came out and we were thought to have got COVID from the Chinese wet markets. All of a sudden, the reptile show in Doncaster was where the new COVID was going to emanate from. You know, and it's an easy problem to solve. Wash your hands. End of problem. Yeah.
Well, do you think that, like, we'll get back to your other 3 in a second. This is something I care about because I'm a baby. Obviously, nidovirus is in the coronavirus family. So a lot of people are like, don't talk about nidovirus in ball pythons, even though it is not transmissible to humans, because people will think that it could be transmissible to humans and will cause the next COVID-23 break. And I'm like, but I feel like if we're just like a normal hobby and we handle our business and just be like, none of them have nido because we test them, or we have good between animal sanitization and we don't lick our snakes. Like, we'll just be on board instead of like not talking about it. Like, that was something that came up. It was like 2 years old now. Do you have any thoughts on that?
The problem is that science isn't the be-all and end-all of the legislative process anymore. No longer is it the case where, hey, we've just proved that ball pythons can't become invasive in Spain, so we're good, right? No, now it's the voice of the arguments, and it's the voice of the people who have control of the narrative, and it's the pressure that these organisations and venues are put under that win the day. I think it was it Peter who took ZooMed to court about their some recommendations in their enclosure sizes, and Peter didn't win the case. They abandoned the case, but it doesn't matter because that information is still out there. Yeah, ZooMed did a great job of addressing that situation, but it doesn't matter whether Peter were right or not. You know, is that your phone?
Yeah, sorry. It is silence, but it's somebody's really interested in talking about PETA, right? Right in a second.
Yeah, that's okay.
Sorry.
As long as it's not mine, because it usually is mine. But this is it. I don't think being right, as in the case of ZooMed, as in the case of the Spanish ball python situation, as in the case of the Doncaster reptile show, I don't think being right is enough anymore. And I think we're a long way behind the animal rights extremists in getting support on our side. They've done a really good job of recruiting support, recruiting voices, recruiting pressure to put pressure on legislators to make decisions that aren't in our favour. I think we need to be better at that, and that's why RRK was born, really.
All right. Back to the other three things that
Oh yeah, so
animal rights people are sort of
welfare.
attacking.
Welfare we discussed. We discussed zoonoses. Human health. So if you keep big pythons, or if you keep venomous, or if you keep, I think it was Spain said you couldn't keep any animal over 2 kilograms.
Wow. Vicious.
Unless it was a Chelonia. So you're okay with a snapping turtle.
Right, but not a ball python. An
No.
adult ball python. Okay.
Yeah.
Vicious.
So, you know, if we took away the rights of everybody to do things that could inflict harm on others, there would be no cars, there would be no, you know, there would be no skydiving, there would... Do you know what the most dangerous animal in the UK was considered to be? Take a guess. So there was a study
donkey.
in the NHS. We don't have many donkeys here.
It's
There was
too cold. Sheep.
There was
rams.
a study in the UK a few years ago where any animal-related injury that made its way into the emergency room had to be recorded. So the most dangerous animal in the UK, take a guess. Not
Cats.
donkey, not sheep.
Cats knocking people downstairs.
No.
Dogs biting people.
No. Second. Dogs were second.
Badgers giving people tuberculosis.
Horses.
Oh yeah, horse will kill you in a minute.
Horses are the most dangerous animals you can work with in the UK. They inflicted most injuries. So that's that. Then dogs, of course. Dogs are a problem. Cats can mess you up as well, we realise. So what was the least dangerous pet animal, kept animal?
Goldfish.
Yep, fish. Yeah. What was the second least dangerous animal?
Frogs.
Reptiles.
Okay. Did they keep like herps together in a category?
I'm not sure. We wouldn't have too many frog injuries, but we did have a tortoise. We did have a tortoise injury.
Oh,
We had a tortoise injury. So I think there were 4 reports when this record keeping was happening. There were 4 reports of reptile-related injuries that I recall, and I might be slightly off here, so forgive me, but the story's worth telling. One of the reports was a guy who thought he saw a snake in his garden, stepped back, stood on a rake, hit him in the face.
That's not real, is it?
That was
That's a cartoon scene.
That was a reptile-related injury that was recorded.
That's
the other
awesome.
one was the tortoise-related injury. It was a lady who was trimming weeds in her back garden and she cut her finger with the shears, and that was a reptile-related injury as well.
Definitely that tortoise's fault. Unacceptable.
So
That's
reptiles,
awesome.
dangerous animals. So they can't really come at us with that dangerous animals thing again. Only one person in the UK has ever died from a venomous kept animal snake bite, and that was my old business partner, a friend of mine. He died from a king cobra bite, and that's the only person ever to die from a venomous snake bite in the UK. And he was a big venomous keeper. He knew his stuff. He was very competent. Just got unlucky. But that's the only death by venomous snake bite. So they shouldn't really be coming at us about public health either. What else do they come at us at? Invasive species. They come at us saying that all these animals are going to become invasive, but we know that the UK is cold and the likelihood of animals becoming invasive in the UK is very slim. The only problem we have is turtles, and believe it or not, the legislation surrounding turtles encourages people to release them. Can you believe that?
Nice. How does it do that? Because that doesn't seem that good. I have an idea.
It's ridiculous. So back in the day, we used to bring in shed loads of trichemis, red-eared sliders, yellow-bellied sliders. What else did we bring in? I have this effect on people. She lives. So red-eared sliders, yellow-bellied sliders. What else did we bring in? Map turtles, things like that. And we used to bring them in by the thousand, sell them at the size of a dime or whatever it is, and you know. But they live for 30, 40, 50 years. They get to be the size of a dinner plate and make a lot of stinky mess and need massive enclosures. So they weren't the best pet. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Then the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles things came out, and all the kids bought them, and then realised that they weren't a very good pet and needed to get rid of them. Mm-hmm. So the reptile trade voluntarily decided to stop bringing them in, but at the time, the fish trade said, hey, well, if the reptile trade aren't bringing them in, we'll bring them in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So then the European government at the time said, okay, well, this is obviously a problem. You guys can't regulate yourselves. We're going to ban trichemis. Yeah. So they banned Trichemis scripta and elegans, and but then the fish trade just kept bringing in other species like Cutus, Sudemis. So there's still a problem. So they were banned, and you couldn't sell them, you couldn't breed them, you couldn't move them, and you couldn't give them to a rescue centre that wasn't licensed. Yeah. And very few rescue centres are licensed to receive those animals. So let's imagine you're Betty. Let's imagine you're Betty and you've had your turtle for 30 years. The legislation says that the turtle, any invasive species must be taken to a place of safe, is it extermination? Or my wife knows best. Safe eradication or extermination. Yeah, I think it's eradication. She's sticking a thumbs up at me. She knows it better than me. And so you're Betty, you're told, I need to get rid of my turtle. Oh, well, we're not licensed. The only thing we can do with it is eradicate it, to euthanize it. So what does Betty do with her turtle? She's not going to...
Yeah, she loves it.
She's not going to euthanize it.
Free.
So that's why our canals and lakes and rivers are have turtles in them now. They're not invasive. They can't breed here. They can't propagate themselves, and they're not known to be environmentally or economically damaging. So they're not invasive. They're non-native. They don't cause too many problems, but they're not supposed to be here. And the legislation promotes people releasing them.
Yeah, and that's something like, I don't know, maybe that should be like your next video or something.
We've already
like
done it.
Exotic versus invasive. As
got ya.
As like a concept. Okay, I think maybe I watched it. I don't know. Just like that concept, people struggle with a lot. Like, yes, it could survive for a little bit, but that doesn't mean, even if it establishes and breeds, if it's not displacing native species, it's not actually meeting the criteria for being invasive. It's just exotic colony.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the legislation is like in the US, but in the UK, in order to be invasive, it has to have either economic or environmental consequences and be able to extend its range. And there are a good few species that have done that in the UK. Ringneck parakeets are all over London, of course, and a load of different plants, etc. But reptiles, it doesn't really exist. The only non-native reptiles we have are a handful of turtles. I say a handful, there are actually quite a few. But also we have Escalopian snakes that there's a population just outside London Zoo, by coincidence. And there's also a population just outside Welsh Mountain Zoo in Bangor. By coincidence, I can't imagine how they got there.
Who knows?
But
zoos are perfect and they do everything correctly every time.
But they've been there since the 70s and they're not getting any bigger. And we have scientific evidence to say that they're not going to become invasive, but there's still a thrust to get rid of them. And there's also an argument to say that they used to be native to the UK, after the last ice age. So maybe they're reintroduced rather than they're invasive. But that's a loose argument.
Right. Well, you'd have to convince. I don't know. We might even have to be doing this anyway. There's been like 20 years of debates whether we should like repatriate all kinds of things back to North America or wherever because we messed it up and whatever, climate change. But like we might have to repatriate animals anyway because of climate change, just like move them latitudinally north because they can't make it there themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a problem and we can't guess what to do, but what I do know is that the UK isn't a hotbed for welfare issues. It isn't a hotbed for zoonotic diseases. It isn't a hotbed for invasive species. The animal rights people are very vocal, very powerful, but when you scrutinize their points, they're easy to knock down. It's just that it's only ever been done at a legislative level at the moment. It's only been done as a firefighting exercise at the last gasp. What we're hoping to do is stop it getting there by discrediting the ridiculousness behind these accusations before they reach that point.
All right, Lisa asked, and then Emma answered again, like, is there a U.S. representative for RRK? And then she said, no, it's international. But do you think maybe you should have, like, I don't know, like co-hosts that maybe are on the ground doing whatever, and then you're like, this is the Canada branch, and they make their
For
own
sure.
videos, or I don't know. So what do you think, like, moving forward, the
We would
goals
love to
are?
do that, and we've actually had conversations with some of our USA supporters about what best practice would look like. And I think that in the future, what we should be trying to achieve is that RRK head office gets the resources together and gets the information together and gets the science together, so that we can have locality specific with local knowledge, USA, Florida, Canada, Italy, Germany, Spain, so that we can do very much like USARC does with its legislative support, but do the same with our communications and media support. Okay, so you've got this issue in Louisiana. We know how to deal with this issue. We've got all these resources that you could use. It's one of the things that we're going to be doing with the Alberta Reptile and Amphibian Society in Canada, is that they have some very specific local issues. We suffer some of those issues here in the UK as well. So us producing content about those issues is sensible, and we can co-badge it with the Alberta Reptile and Amphibian Society, and that they help us with funding so that we can achieve that. And this is exactly what we should be doing. And it's the only way to go, really. We're a very small team. I do all the reptile knowledge, and my wife does most of the media and graphic design. We have a videographer, web guy who's just absolutely awesome, fell from heaven for us, because he sorts out so many things that we aspire to do, and he achieves it. But there's just 3 of us at the moment. We're not well funded. I'm currently a volunteer. My wife isn't paid what she deserves, I can tell you that much. So we're not funded enough to do all the work that we want to do yet. We're only 8 months old. We don't expect to be well funded enough yet. We're still earning our stripes. Our support from America comes from 4 organisations. I'd like to give them a shout out. So Zen Habitats, on there since day 1. Zen Habitats, thank you very much. We've got a super fan in a guy called Paul Barkley. You know Paul Barkley, from Custom Reptile Habitats.
Friend of the show.
He's awesome. He's given us so much advice and so much help, and he funds us as well. Xoterra jumped on board in the very early days. We're funded from Xoterra UK, Canada, Germany, and the USA. And it was the head guy from the USA that agreed to fund us. And since this month, ZoomEd came on board as well. They really like what we're doing, and they're funding us as well. And so we're making further forays out into the US to look for other people who support our work. And when we get that support, when we get that funding, we will be extending our reach and hopefully having some representatives in the USA. It's the only way to go. We can't do all of the work. We're already stretched very thinly. But people seem to like what we do. They seem to approve of what we do. We seem to have hit a chord, you know? So if people like what we do, we'll continue doing it. We'll live and die by whether we're doing a good job or not. If people like what we do, they'll fund us. And if they don't like what we do, they won't fund us, and we won't do very well. But we seem to be doing pretty well at the moment.
Well, I think you're doing a good job. So, and only my opinion really counts.
You were the first person. You were the first person to give us a shout out on social media.
Oh my gosh, I feel so special.
You should. We were absolutely elated. We had that little section of video sent to us from, I think it was 4 different people in the USA, and we were over the moon.
I didn't even know 4 people watched.
you were the first people to say, "Hey, have you seen these guys? What they're doing? That's awesome." And that was our first bit of a sort of pat on the head from the USA. Yeah.
Listen, trust me, you're literally desperately needed, and we all know it. We just don't need to admit it. So, like, I'm in. I'm a member. Wait,
you were one of our first members as well. I think you were one of our first members from the USA, like signed up of their own accord without us contacting them first. You know.
Yeah, because I believe it, because 90% of our problems are about like optics and messaging. Like most people are like, oh, you have a happy leopard gecko as a pet. Great. Like most people are on our side. It's like a very small number of people who like control the narrative all the time.
That's
So
absolutely right, and it's wrong that that a very vocal and outspoken minority of people should impose their extremist and outlandish views on the majority of people who are doing a really good job at keeping reptiles. I wish, in some ways, that I was still that very naive kid 30 years ago, just going, oh, I like those species, I'll have one, I'll have that one, I'll have one of those. Isn't it wonderful keeping reptiles? And then I got initiated into the political, I'm going to say shit show again, that was trying to stop people from keeping reptiles. And I felt so unfairly treated. I wish I was still naive and wasn't so concerned about the political side of things, but I am. And I felt like I should do something about it. I felt like I had the skills and the knowledge and the passion to do something about it. Our job is to let people know that if they support us, we'll continue fighting that fight on their behalf. We'll continue doing that work. Have a look at our content.
The website again. ResponsibleReptilekeeping.org. Link is in the show notes. And this is what it looks like. It's got a beautiful buddy here.
So if you click on the knowledge tab, yeah, that's where we store all of our contents, all of the videos we make, the podcasts we make, the articles, and the magazine will be coming out soon. If you join as a member, you'll just get this magazine.
Yeah, and it looks nice. You could send this to your grandma. She wouldn't be scared or whatever.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Under resources. Oh,
sorry.
That's okay. Keep going. So we've got our store locator. They're mostly UK stores at the moment, but we're looking to reach into America soon to recruit American stores so that we can advocate for them as well. The idea is that we can't reach every keeper. We need to recruit the help of the stores to reach every keeper. They're the people who can contact every keeper and filter information down to them. We really need the stores on our side. They're the guys with all the information and the passion and the knowledge to make the reptile community work at its best. So we desperately need stores on side.
Yeah. So you're going to be at this Tinley?
I'm hoping so.
March.
This next one, October.
Okay.
The idea is that this weekend we'll be booking tickets and booking hotels, etc.
I keep getting peer pressured into going. No, it's 13-hour drive for me, so I could technically drive it, but
yeah. Well,
I don't know. Maybe I'll see you there.
Well, we've made some big inroads into the UK, and it's becoming increasingly clear that we need to make those same inroads in the USA. We've pressure tested the concept in the UK, and it's been successful beyond our imagination. We've spoken to many people in the USA about whether it would work there as well, and they're all on our side. So it's just a case of us doing the legwork now and getting to the USA, making contact, shaking hands, speaking to people, and getting their advice as well. We sit in our little office here at home thinking we know what we should do and we know what the situation is and we know how to deal with the problems, but we don't. We have to speak to the people on the ground floor who are, handling reptiles, working with the animals, working with the public, working with legislators, and we want advice as well. So that's another important reason for us to come to the USA, so that we can understand.
And the US is really weird. Let's just be honest. Like, we're weird.
Honestly.
Yeah,
really?
We're weird. I don't look at us.
Hey,
you can't take us anywhere.
Hold my beer, because I think I could match your stories of
I don't know,
from the UK.
I mean, I guess if guns versus knives, who would win? I guess we would win and in terms of sheer madness. We got you beat. Yeah. But if you guys could shift somebody in an alley, that'd be pretty good too.
We've got our own collection, but the reptile guys, honestly, the reptile community deserves to be applauded instead of knocked down. We've got our strange guys, we've got our nerds, we've got the weirdos, but on the whole, most of them are doing a great job, and I would put myself amongst those nerds and weirdos and strange people who love reptiles. We're doing a good job and we deserve to shout about it. So
yeah, I think that's important to, the last thought, important to like the market's down. A lot of people are like, oh no, I'm this, I'm that. the industry, it's almost like if you believe in it and what you're doing and that these are good pets, it doesn't matter that the market's a little slow or whatever, because they're still good pets. Like you can still place them in a pet home, and you're sort of transferring the love that you have to a next generation or somebody else, or different kinds of people, different kinds of communities. We're actually like doing great stuff, I think, too. So that's why I am a supporter of.
I very much worry about the next generation of reptile keepers. I worry that they won't have the joys and the opportunities that we've had to keep these amazing animals and learn about them and work with them. And I think that would be grossly unfair. I think it would be grossly unfair. If you want to do it as a business, that's great news. We need a trade. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But everybody who starts a business knows the risks. Everybody who starts a business with reptiles knows that the risks are probably even higher than for other businesses. So, business is one thing. But just from a pet perspective, the idea that my nephews and nieces would be stopped from keeping a king snake for absolutely no good reason, mm-hmm. would be stopped from keeping a tortoise for no good reason, that, I don't know, I just feel a bit done by and hurt by that. And I don't want that to happen. It would be much easier if I just went off and, I don't know, got a proper job and didn't worry about the political side of reptiles. But I just think it's so unfair.
Right. It's worth fighting for.
It is.
It's fighting against.
Because where do they stop?
That. Right.
Reptiles are the low-hanging fruit for animal rights people. They start with reptiles because it's easy to convince the general public that it's a problem. But they won't stop there. Lots of anti-pet keeping organisations who are campaigning against reptiles also want to stop parrots and raptors and fish and hamsters and rabbits, and they keep legislating. What their aim is animal apartheid. So they want a complete separation of humankind from animal kind, whether that be in diets, whether that be in skins, clothing, hunting, animal keeping, farming. Every interaction between animals and humans is what they want to stop. That's their end game. And they'll start with reptiles and they won't end there. Rest assured.
Absolutely. Well, we'll fight them. The good fight.
That's what we're here for.
All right. Thank you, Tony. You did a great job. And we made it. We made it to the end of the show. And hopefully everybody joins when you can, now if you can, later. And they'll see you at Tinley. That's a big thing.
Yes. We should come and shake our hand at Tinley. It'd be nice to see you.
But you won't have a table because nobody can get a table at Tinley. You'll just be like loitering somewhere. Do you know where you'll be?
Responsible reptile keeping t-shirt on.
All right. Look for Tony, everybody. Thank you for Tony. Let's wave and I'll hit the button. Bye, everybody.
Hey, appreciate your time.